newly discovered antibody that attacks a protein called CD320, which transports vitamin B12 across the blood-brain barrier.
Chris, at Function Health, we've now tested over 300,000 people. We have probably over 50 million data points. And we see these patterns. We see over 90% have some degree of insulin resistance. We see 13% of autoantibodies to the thyroid, many of them not diagnosed, which causes depression. We see massive nutritional deficiencies, not at the level that I would think would be optimal, like vitamin D over 50, but like the reference range was just 30. Iron deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, omega-3 deficiency, folate deficiency through homocysteine, methylmalonic acid. We see so many things on the function panel that are biomarkers of mental illness, which nobody talks about. So let's take a minute to kind of dive into a little bit about what are the biomarkers that you've been exploring around mental illness, because you've been looking at some of these things like folate, B12, microplastics. Kind of tell us about your work in that area.
It's really exciting. So I run the metabolic mental health program at McLean Hospital, Harvard Medical School. So we have the privilege of doing a lot of different research studies. And I'm really interested, again, in root causes. And so there are two antibodies that we're exploring, that one of them prevents folate from crossing the blood-brain barrier. And the other is a newly discovered antibody that attacks a protein called CD320, which transports vitamin B12 across the blood-brain barrier. Prior to about 3 years ago, nobody was aware that humans could spontaneously develop this autoantibody. Mm-hmm. There is not a commercially available test. I know that's a logical question when I'm talking about this. People are going to be like, where can I get this test? It is not yet commercially available because it is so brand new. People are working on it. But the reason both of those antibodies are really important because folate and vitamin B12 are required for numerous reactions in the body, but most of them center on mitochondria and metabolism. Right. They are so if you have folate deficiency, you have a metabolic problem. If you have vitamin B12 deficiency and or a deficiency in the methylated versions because you're having trouble methylating them, you have a metabolic problem.
That's the active form, right?
And so the reason these antibodies are particularly intriguing to me as a psychiatrist is because if you measure their levels of folate and B12 from their arm, they will be normal.
Yeah.
If you look for homocysteine in the periphery, it's normal. They show no signs from the biomarkers that we would normally measure from your blood. They show no signs of being abnormal.
Yeah.
The person can be eating the healthiest possible diet, can have no gastrointestinal problems, but can be profoundly deficient in folate or B12 in their central nervous system.
The antibodies block.
Because the antibodies are preventing the transport of these vitamins across the blood-brain barrier into the brain and spinal cord. The reason that's really important to me, again, is because on the surface, if I look at the person externally, they can look otherwise healthy and actually be otherwise healthy. Their heart can be relatively healthy because it's getting all the nutrients it needs. If the person's eating a healthy diet and exercising regularly, their heart probably is healthy, but their brain can be grossly impaired in terms of its ability to function. And when we see brain impairment in a relatively young person, guess what that gets called? 99 out of 100 times. It gets called a mental illness.
Yeah.
We call that a mental illness. Your brain isn't working right. That's a mental illness. And then we slap a label on you. We say it's genetic. We treat you with relatively toxic medications for life, and then we just write you off. So the reason I'm interested in these antibodies is because it helps us understand, like I said, the pathways are dominoes. There are a lot of dominoes in play. But let me walk you through one clear example. Because the leading theory about, well, what would cause these antibodies to develop in the first place. The leading theory is inflammation of the blood-brain barrier. And that could be caused by a virus. So let's take a
anything that causes inflammation.
Anything that causes inflammation, but let me walk down that example. So you could have a perfectly happy, healthy child who gets a viral infection. They have neuroinflammation, including inflammation of the blood-brain barrier. Their immune system is primed for whatever reason to develop antibodies to CD320, which now prevents vitamin B12 from crossing the blood-brain barrier. This child, unlike most with COVID, for example, who recover and do fine, this child falls off a cliff, develops new onset psychotic symptoms, new onset OCD, new onset panic disorder. And sometimes we call it pandas. Sometimes we call it something else. Sometimes we just call it a mental illness. And now this child has a mental illness due to a metabolic brain problem that we largely don't recognize. The reason I'm so we're going to be doing the first ever study of these two antibodies in the largest cohort of people with schizophrenia.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking for these antibodies in patients who have already been diagnosed with schizophrenia to see how many of them might have these antibodies. And then we're going to compare that to an equal cohort of healthy controls. By healthy, we don't mean completely healthy because no one is. But we mean they've never been diagnosed with a mental illness. And we're going to see if there's a difference. The reason I'm particularly passionate and driven to do this research is because if we see these antibodies, there are clear treatments. If you have this antibody against folate, there is an existing treatment called leucovorin that we can deliver today to get folate into your brain and spinal cord. Even with no FDA approval needed, the FDA, in fact, just approved leucovorin as a treatment for autism for this exact reason.
I mean, and Chris, when I've been practicing, I'm old for a long time, and I've treated a lot of autistic kids. And one of the things we've been testing for decades is folate receptor antibodies. And they often are cross-reacting to dairy. And you cut out the dairy and you give them high doses of methylated folate, and the lights come on in these kids. And it doesn't mean that all autism is caused by this. It means that in some subsets, this is a problem. And if you look for it, you'll find it. And it's just remarkable that it's coming out with B12 related antibodies as well as the other folate antibodies. And it's treatable. And again, everybody, this is not the full solution. This is just in some particular subset of people with mental illness or autism, this is a problem. But it just points to the fact that we actually are now beginning to kind of tease apart the biological mechanisms, be able to diagnose it. I mean, the joke is that neurologists pay no attention to the mind and psychiatrists pay no attention to the brain. And that's changing a lot.
It is. It is. Well, and to tie even that research in with my existing research on ketogenic therapy. So could ketogenic therapy help somebody who has one of these autoantibodies? We have every reason to believe it might.
Yeah.
Because ketogenic therapy is broadly anti-inflammatory and actually ramps down the immune system. Why does it do that? Because ketogenic therapy mimics the fasting state. When your body thinks it is starving, it actually reduces immune system function as a survival mechanism. Now, long term,
anti-inflammatory.
It's anti-inflammatory. That is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. Anti-inflammatory in over 20 studies looking at inflammatory biomarkers and ketogenic therapy. But it also reduces immune system like autoimmune disorders. There's research on multiple sclerosis. Terry Walls is doing one of the largest studies of ketogenic diet versus whole food Mediterranean diet versus controlled diet for multiple sclerosis. Even in my world, when I deliver a ketogenic diet to somebody with schizophrenia and their symptoms get better, that's the way I'm thinking about it. Maybe this diet is actually reducing an autoimmune condition that is impairing their brain-body physiology. And so is that a root cause treatment? I don't think of it as a root cause treatment. I actually think, I don't know what the actual root cause is, but ketogenic therapy might be correcting it. And interestingly, fasting mimicking that. Fasting's been around for millennia in every culture for a reason, because it actually works. Yeah. and there's a reason it works, and it's because our physiology is kind of designed that
resets.
way.
Yeah, this is an amazing conversation.
If you love that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here.